Dr. Hogan, it's a great pleasure to have you here on HRTV. The last time we had the opportunity to discuss, it was 6 years ago when you were in the Czech Republic. Today there's another conference about leadership. Leadership is still a big topic, not only in the Czech Republic but throughout the world, and it's the main topic that you pay attention throughout your life. Why did you choose leadership? Why do you think leadership is so important?
Well, everything, I think people's interests are always lodged in their own, located in their own biography. So I worked my way through college and and I was in charge of a group of janitors, basically, working class boys doing dirty work. And I learned a lot about how to persuade working class kids to do dirty work. And then I went in the Navy. I was commissioned as an officer in the Navy, went in the Navy, and I inherited a mess. And I got it fixed, and I straightened it out so that my part of the ship, the part of the ship that I was responsible for, performed at a really high level. The other officers who were at my level were furious with me, and they constantly criticized me, saying that I didn't know anything about leadership. And I said, wait a minute, my part of the ship is working really well, yours isn't, who knows about leadership? So I put up with that for 18 months, just intense criticism about me not understanding leadership. And that's where it all started. I thought, at some point I'm going to find out what counts as good leadership and what doesn't. So that was always in the back of my head, that the 18 months of being criticized. And I got into psychology for different reasons, and at some point about, I don't know, in the mid-1980s, I finally had enough time to just study leadership. To get on top of an academic field, you have to take like almost a year off from your life and just spend time reading and reading and reading and reading. So I don't know, sort of the mid-1980s, I took basically a year off and just dove into, became sort of a master authority of leadership literature. And what I discovered was that academics don't know anything about leadership, or what they had to say about leadership. What I found in the standard textbooks, the standard journal articles, what I found there didn't align with my own personal experience with how I had done leadership on board the ship. So that's when I got to say, okay, I'm going to try to figure this out in an empirical way. That's my origins. The origins of my interest in leadership come from my own personal experience in the Navy. And then being really, really, really disappointed in what academics had to say about leadership subsequent to that.
From your experience, and from what I remember from our former or previous discussion, is that you said winners win, losers lose. And you were mentioning these two guys just stayed in my head, and I remember it. One is Jose Mourinho. And you said Jose Mourinho, wherever he goes, most of the time...
He does.
He wins. And he won yesterday.
Yes.
He won again.
Yes.
He won again. So winners win, losers lose. And the other one was Ulysses Grant, former president of the United States in the 19th century. The same thing. So my question is, are you born as a successful leader, or can you actually learn to become a successful leader? Because there are two important issues. Because can people actually learn to become successful leaders? Or are they just born successful?
I think it would be a good analogy with tennis. Are you born being a good tennis player? No. You're born with talent for tennis or not. It would be a normal. Some people will be born with good hand-eye coordination and reflexes and balance, and other people won't. And so they have the native talent, and then they need practice to become a good tennis player. But good tennis players, top tennis players, had the talent when they were born. The same way I think leadership, people have the talent, but they have to be thrust into the role in order for it to be displayed. And there's a lot of learning that goes on in leadership. I mean, you don't just get it right the first time. There's just a lot of learning goes on in tennis. You have to practice and practice to be any good at it.
Let's say there's somebody who is in his or her 20s and watching our discussion here, and he or she really wants to become a successful leader, not only in the job but also in the family. You mentioned you worked with kids, with problematic kids. What does it take to learn to become a successful leader? Because in your presentation you show that there are certain steps or certain characteristics of a successful leader, but what does it take, and what should the people do to become successful leaders? What are the steps?
Yeah, well, it's the most important thing is to be able to learn from experience, particularly to learn from your mistakes. And there's real data on this. That the successful leaders, failed leaders are people who can't learn, can't adapt, can't grow, can't learn from experience. And there's an old German expression, experience is the teacher of fools. Good people can learn from taking advice. So being able to learn from experience and being coachable, being able to listen to good advice is just essential. Arrogant people can't think they know it all. They can't profit from it. They never learn from experience because they don't think they ever make a mistake, and you can't coach them because they already know. And we can measure this, by the way. We can measure people's ability to learn from experience. And some people get a normal distribution of that too. Some people can learn from experience, most people can't.
How is it possible that you also mentioned that you distinguish between two kinds of, not leaders, but managers? One group is politicians, people who are very successful in climbing the ladder, and it doesn't matter in politics or in business. And the second ones are the real leaders who work with their teams and stuff. But is it possible to see combinations of these two factors? Because sometimes you have very successful politicians, leaders who climb to a certain stage, and up to that point they are very successful. They have results, they're very good, but from a certain point they just fall down, and we see it now in what's going on in the world.
So you raise a variety of issues about the winners win and losers lose in the Jose Mourinho example. That's a really good example of someone who's very good with his team but can't get along with the bosses. So that's why he's moved so often. His teams love him, but he gets in trouble with the politics in the organization. He won't play politics appropriately. And so he's a really good leader, but the organization will reject him because these guys have to be managed. I was talking to a very successful university president once, and I said, "What's the most important part about being a university president?" And he said, "Board relations, being able to deal with the board." He said, "That's more important almost than anything else you do." So, and some people are unwilling to do that. Jose Mourinho. So that was part of the answer, and I can't remember what the rest of the question was.
Yes, it's what we see usually in states with.
That's a good example of a guy who rises to this point, and that's it. It's because he won't play politics. To keep on going, you have to somehow, and then the scope of the job changes. Some people they'll be very good at this level. You bring them at this level, they'll keep trying to do at this level what they did at this level, and you can't. The first line supervisors have to work directly with the troops, and that leadership really, really matters. Mid-level managers are basically politicians or diplomats. They have to take bullshit requests from the guys up here and sell them to the guys down here. And so they'll go to these guys down here and they say, "Okay, we have to do X," and they're, "I don't do that." Well, so the mid-managers have to negotiate between crazy orders from up above and resistance from the workforce. And then people at the top, I think the job at the top is about making good decisions. It's not about inspiring people or holding people accountable. These guys down here, first level, are the ones who are doing real leadership. That's where the problems are in most organizations, actually, is long-serving first-line supervisors. When you do a leadership intervention in a company, you're always talking about the people up here. Down here's where the problems are. So these people are always smart and pretty well informed and know what's going on. But the real problems in leadership occurred where the organization actually interfaces with the staff, and that's first-line supervisors. People up at the top here, their principal job is to strategy, is to figure out a decision. Which way are we going to go? They're not. So there are at least three levels. First-line supervision, you really have to be a good leader. Mid-level management, you have to be a good politician. At the top, you have to be a good strategist. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does. But what is interesting about this concept is, at least what can be seen in the companies, is the higher you are on the company ladder, the less risk you actually take.
Yes.
Because I heard so many stories about the top managers who are fired and they get so much money that they can live off for the rest of their lives. But if you fail as a low manager or middle manager, your risk is that you're fired.
Gone, yeah.
If you are a commander in the army, in the war, the risk is your life.
Yeah.
So the interesting part is this risk-taking scenario, including most of the top managers.
Yeah.
And this is what is interesting to hear and to see,
really
that if you're fired, you fail, but you still get so much money that the risk is unimportant.
Yes, exactly.
And this is what's surprising me, because it's still what the companies do. They just give you so much money that even if you fail, it just doesn't matter.
Yep.
Just go on.
Yep. And it's not fair.
It's not fair. And it has a lot of common with with your theory and with what you show and tell on these conferences, because there are two kinds of leaders and two kinds of fights. One within the organization, where this dogfight, where you want to just be the alpha male or female or whatever, and the other one, more important, is the clash for survival.
Way more important.
Way more important.
And psychologists never talk about that.
And it also, you introduce this concept of personality. Is it true?
Yeah.
And you mentioned that a lot of psychologists opposed to it because they thought it's nonsense.
I think it's all about IQ.
Yes, it was, and it was in the 70s. And how do you convince them, or what is your argument for that this concept is really valid, of this concept of personality?
Well, I mean, there's only one right way to try to convince anybody, and that's with data. But the bad news is that they don't believe your data. So there's an old line. It was Niels Bohr, the father of atomic theory. He said, "In science, you never convince your intellectual enemies. You have to wait until they die." I think that's true.
That's true. True.
They have a whole career swept up in a particular point of view, and they have arguments that they use to support it. And you bring data. You have to bring data. You have to do it based on data, but they won't believe your data.
In Hogan assessment, you use a lot of data. You store a lot of data. You collect a lot of data, and you mentioned that you have for almost every kind of type of position, every job
in the U.S. economy.
In the U.S. economy, but now even throughout the world in the individual countries.
Yes.
You have enough data to show what it takes to
be good at that job.
Yes. In that job.
Yes.
Is there a future in that? Because internet and all these digital technologies help you even more collect data, store data, analyze data. Is the future in not only collecting the data, but make it maybe more accessible for people in the companies? Because today your presentation was dedicated more to people who hire people, who train people, who are responsible for the people in the organizations. And the people, they like to hear your introduction of this leadership concept, but when they return to their offices, they really need to hire people, train people, fire people, and work with data. How can they use Hogan assessment data to work better with people and to help develop leaders?
Well, I mean, that's a really good question. That's, of course, the future of our business. And that's what we're trying to understand and make happen.
Because data is essential, and I 100% agree. When you look what is going on in the world now, or if you looked at it from the above, there are maybe two opposite powers fighting against each other. One, let's call it, or three, call it democracy, or more, where actually more people are involved in the leadership. And the other one is more authoritarian kind of regime, which I would call it more historically based or more common. Is it what we see now, not only with the war in Ukraine, but these two titans fighting against each other? Do you think there is an evolution in this process? Because according to your theory, the leader should learn from the mistakes. A good leader should more listen to the objectives or to the complaints of the people, what they tell them. The authoritarian regimes usually do not do that. They just get up to the point where they collect power, and when they have the almost absolute power, they do what they want, usually. And we've seen this with Hitler, we see it with other dictators, but they are really successful when climbing up to that point where they collect a lot of power. And on the other hand, we see these more democratic societies or organizations or regimes where the leaders don't have the absolute power and they really need to coordinate their decisions with more people. Do you think the future is that, and we have seen a lot of dictators to fail in the last 20 years. Do you think the future, I would say, of the world is that everything step by step gets to the point where we will not care so much about fighting against each other? I mean, countries against the countries, but maybe thinking more how to survive on this planet or how to make the common life on this planet more livable for most of us, because this is the only way to survive on this planet, I would say.
I'm not very optimistic. I think I don't think there's progress. Such progress as you see comes from better technology, comes from economic development, but I don't think people get better, and more enlightened. So on the one hand, I would say that was a very complicated question. I would say a couple of things. One is that I think academics, people, political scientists, sociologists, historians, economists, psychologists haven't thought this through very carefully. I don't think democracy per se even exists. I think read The Economist magazine. They talk about democracy going together with economic development. Well, I think what's important about democracy is the fact that it lets entrepreneurs go. It lets people try. I think the important point about a democracy is that it allows economic freedom. But the Chinese and the Taiwanese and the South Koreans have all had really robust economies without having democracy. So I think it's because they let their entrepreneurs loose. So that's a real problem for democracy. And in addition to, I mean, China had a really good economy until 2 years ago, and that's because Deng Xiaoping within the context of an autocracy, he let entrepreneurs go. Well, I mean, that's the trick, and if that's it, then what do you need democracy? And the thing is that an autocracy can respond more quickly to, I mean, Joe Biden has almost no power at all. It's a wonder he gets anything done. I don't know how he does it. Whereas Putin or Xi Jinping go, they're done. So they're able to respond a whole lot faster. I think I'm really worried about the future of democracy. But the fundamental issue is basically how strong is your economy. The strongest economy, that's how World War II was decided. It was based on who had the best economy, not who had the best political system. Mm-hmm. So it's all about, I think the conversation is not about democracy, the conversation is about the economy and what kind of political system lets the economy, because that's where the military might comes from. Robust economy, you can buy weapons, right?
Exactly.
Shitty economy, you can't buy weapons. So, and how do you get a robust economy? Well, I'm not sure democracy is what it's like. It's just about letting entrepreneurs go, and tyrants, autocrats can do that as well as Democrats. In fact, the essence of the progressives in the U.S. government is to regulate entrepreneurs. So, really complicated question, and I don't think most important generalization I can make is I don't think there's any progress. I think we're just kind of wandering around. One thing, so shit happens theory of history. One thing happens after another. And
so it's just a constant fight for resources?
I think so. Yes. I really do. And historically, this is the rules-based liberal order system has worked better economically, but Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore's an autocracy, very robust, really, second highest standard of living in the world. They don't have democracy. So it's a really interesting argument that you can have freedom or you can have equality, but you can't have both.
Can't have both.
So if you have freedom, then some people are going to make more money than others. If you have equality, you have to stamp down freedom. And that's just a fascinating paradox. And it's true.
We hear a lot of terms about fair society or fair business, and people want freedom and they want fairness, and it's the two important concepts why people go to work, because they
at least and you can't have both at the same time.
No,
you can't.
Because in the authoritarian regimes, the people, they are just, okay, they say, okay, it's the way it is, we can do anything about it, and maybe even they don't want. Maybe
in my view, what you have in, let's say, here in the Czech Republic, is you had a relatively stable system, but there are, out there in the woods, in the countryside, there are hundreds of Viktor Orbáns wanting to take over. And you had a guy, I forgot, you had one, you had a right-wing.
Yes, we had more of them, but the last one, yeah.
They're out there. They're always out there. They're like the wolves that are around the campfire, looking for an opportunity to come in. They're always there. There are always these guys who want to take charge and run things for their own benefit. And you have to be, and sooner or later, I mean, they're constantly coming.
It happens in every society.
And you never get it fixed. You always have to be on guard.
Let's go back to business. What is most important what the people in the middle management shall do in these times to really pay attention in developing good leaders? Because this is the question that people will be asked after they come back to their managers, to their senior managers. The senior managers will ask them, how shall we develop good leaders? What would be, let's say, the simple answer, and what would be the biggest obstacle in this process?
Well, two answers. I love this statement. If you want to change people, you have to change people. You have to get new ones. And I don't think you can build, I think you have to select them. We have a profile of an effective leader. You have to use that profile to decide who your leaders are going to be and who they're not going to be. So there's some kind of, I love this piece of historical data. This is almost beside the point, but it's not necessarily. So the German army invented psychological personality assessment at the end of World War I. They thought they'd lost the war because of bad leadership. And they wanted a systematic way of finding good leaders. And they invented personality assessment in the 1920s.
100 years ago?
Well, it worked really well until the Nazis came. And then what they found was that favored Nazi candidates were getting rejected by the assessment systems. They said, it doesn't work anymore. So, but what happened was, so they were running this in Germany, and two guys from Harvard went to Germany, saw what they were doing, and brought that personality assessment methodology back to Harvard, and then it radiated out through the United States. And then when World War II started, they took that German personality assessment method and used it to hire spies and do leadership. So, but the study of leadership, in the modern study of leadership, begins with the German army after World War I. And I think that's and then they forgot about it, but we're basically doing today pretty much what they were doing then, only in a more digitally enhanced method. I think it's quite. But so the study of personality psychology from the beginning was an applied activity, and it was designed. It had an application, and the intent was so the study of leadership and the study of personality have been linked in the United States since 1920. I think it's quite interesting.
It is, because the massive use was from, you introduced this concept newly in the 70s.
I'm just doing what folks were doing in the 1920s, but it's radical today. What is it? What's old becomes new or something like that?
According to the normal distribution, you mentioned that 20% people are usually responsible for 80% of the results and 80% of the problems.
Yep.
Shall the HR officers or the managers pay more attention to this small group of, let's call it high potential people or good leaders, or should they work, because you don't have all the time in the world to dedicate to people. It's not possible in the companies. It's much more effective to pay attention to this small group of people who achieve more. Is it a way to do it in the companies, in helping leaders grow and helping employees to succeed?
Well, in principle, there's a way to do it, but inside every organization, it's all politics all the time. And so, the internal politics will get in the way of rational procedures.
Because the advantage of the charming leaders or politicians in the organization is that they are just charming. They look good. They can network with people. It's much easier to promote these kinds of people, and also as I saw in one of your presentations, the senior managers like to choose the people that help them succeed in their careers. So it's very difficult to apply some of your
all
principles.
Politics, all the time.
All politics. And the only exception is, as you mentioned, startups, small companies.
Yes.
And these are this is the essential of business, basically, because the politics doesn't play much.
It doesn't have time.
Have time.
Because you're so busy trying to grow the business.
But what we see in big companies is when they really want to improve their processes and succeed, they kind of cut the big organization structure into small businesses. This is what we've seen for the last 10 years. They call it agile approach, or they call it creating startups within big organization, and they completely just crush this old organization hierarchy, or whatever we can call it. And this is what we didn't see 20 years ago, but we see it now. So are you at least a little bit optimistic in this?
Well, that's definitely a step in the right direction. Anything you can do to break down the existing political barriers, because they just get set and rigid, and then it becomes really hard to change. Because there's vested interest in keeping things the same, because that's where my power lies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Dr. Hogan, last question.
Yes.
Fight for food, fight for resources. Is it this constant clash that has been here since the mankind was appeared on this earth? Do you think it's a never-ending process, and that in the future, you also, the discussion, you told me 6 years ago that we shall care less about Facebook, Google, and entertainment in the future, and we shall concentrate more on food, how to feed people, where to get resources.
Oh my God!
What do you think? How do you think you're? I would say in the peak point of your career. How do you think the future will look like?
I'm quite pessimistic. The population of sub-Saharan Africa is going to double by 2050. They're already starving. They're already starving now. What happens when that population doubles? Immigration is going to become a severe issue for people other than the United States. People are already starving, and there's a significant portion of the population in Afghanistan is starving. I mean, food, even in the U.S., the food banks where they give away food to people, those lines are getting longer and longer and longer. It's Thomas Malthus, about 1776, wrote a book on something that's a treatise on populations. He argued, Darwin picked up this argument, he argued that populations always expand past the carrying capacity of the food supply where they live. Populations always, if there's enough food, they breed, they reproduce.
It's like animals, it's the same.
Just like deer, just like rabbits, just like rats. And then there are too many people and not enough food, and then there has to be a die-off. I think we're going to see a die-off. It's going to be right back. No one ever refers to Malthus. It's Malthus. No one ever refers to Malthus anymore. I think we're looking at a Malthusian revolution coming right now. I mean, it's on the horizon. It's not going to be pleasant. I can hardly watch the news at night. I mean, I can't stand pictures of starving babies. It just makes me crazy. What are you going to do?
This is a big issue.
You throw money at it, they just make more babies.
Exactly.
I mean, you can't get in front of the problem. So.
It doesn't happen in what we call the biggest economies in the world, but it does happen in 2/3 of
70% of the world is in bad trouble. You know, the U.S. and the struggle between the U.S., China, and Russia, Ukraine. That's a small proportion of the. Mexico doesn't care. Brazil is a big country. Brazil doesn't care what's going on. Indonesia doesn't care, and that's a huge country. Saudi Arabia doesn't care. It's basically a parochial preoccupation. It happens to be our preoccupation, but the rest of the world just doesn't care about it.
And that's the biggest issue.
Yes, exactly.
Dr. Hogan, thank you very much for
being
here. It was a great pleasure to have you here, and wish you
I hope it was helpful.
Everything best to the future. Thank you.
Thank you.